Welcome, everybody. My name is Deborah Goldman, and I am the chair of the Buffalo Jewish Community Relations Council. Welcome to this talkback of the documentary Shared Legacies, African American Jewish Civil Rights Alliance by director Shari Rogers. This event is presented by the Buffalo International Jewish Film Festival, a program of the JCC of Buffalo. The JCRC is proud to sponsor this talkback. This documentary is the only film that immortalizes this important civil rights alliance. We have witnessed history. This film is not just history, but also a call to action, a call for the African American community and Jewish community to remember their collective history. As Reverend and Senator Raphael Warnock says, both peoples were immersed in suffering, and it gives our communities a shared perspective on the world. The Jewish Community Relations Council is dedicated with its partners to work towards racial justice, criminal justice reform, combating hate, and anti-Semitism. It is now my privilege to introduce our moderator, Rabbi Adam Rosenbaum of Temple Beth Tzedek, who will introduce our panelists. Rabbi Rosenbaum.
Thank you, Deborah. It is an honor to be with everyone here tonight. And I'm pleased to be joined by an esteemed panel. I'd like to introduce them to all of you who are watching. First, Rabbi Everett Gendler, whom you saw interviewed in the film. He is known for his involvement in progressive causes, including the civil rights movement, Jewish nonviolence, and the egalitarian Jewish Chavurah movement. From 1978 until 1995, he served as the first Jewish chaplain at Phillips Academy in Andover. And Rabbi Gendler became involved in the conservation and environmental movements and community education work among Tibetan exiles. Welcome, Rabbi Gendler. Pastor Mark E. Blue is the president of the NAACP Buffalo Branch. He's also pastor at the Second Baptist Church. He sits on the New York State Vaccine Equity Task Force. He was born in Buffalo and joined the United States Air Force Reserve in 1983 and retired 20 years later with the rank of Master Sergeant. And he also joined the Buffalo Jewish Federation on an interfaith clergy trip to Israel in 2017. Though I don't know, with your Air Force experience, did you do the flying?
No, I was flown.
Okay, fair enough. fair enough. Welcome, Reverend Blue.
Thank you.
And last but certainly not least, Rene Petties-Jones is the president of the National Federation for Just Communities of Western New York Incorporated. It's a long name, which is why she has it right behind her. So much appreciated. And this organization is one of the region's oldest human rights organizations. She received her dual BA in psychology and human services from the University at Buffalo and is a graduate of Buffalo City Honors School. She's received numerous recognitions and awards, including the Business First Women of Influence Award. And also she serves on several local and regional boards of directors. Rene, welcome as well.
Thank you for having me.
All right, well, great. So we had the chance to speak by Zoom prior to this. And what I'm gonna do for the next half hour or so is to go through a number of questions that I know you've seen. For each one will be directed at each of you. So I'll just randomly pick the person to start, and then you can hand it over to the next one. And then with about 7:40 or so, we'll move on to any questions that people watching may have. For those who are watching, I'm going to be fed a number of questions from the chat. So certainly, if you're watching and if you'd like to ask some questions to our esteemed panelists, hopefully we will do our best to get to those. So First of all, I'm just going to go in order of who I see on my screen here. Reverend Blue, if we could start with you.
Sure.
My question is, this documentary makes a reference to the importance of Blacks and Jews, quote, not comparing scars. How do we avoid this in our modern conversation? So Reverend Blue, you'll start, and then I'd love to hear from both from the others as well.
Well, in that comparison, one of the things that I look at is that people say not comparing scars, but those scars are deeply rooted. We have to address the scars. In any type of sore, scabs appear, but at various times that scab is torn off. So we have to address the makeup of how we both, and I'm talking about the African-American community and the Jewish community, have been marginalized and taken advantage of, not being treated fairly. So it's very important to address the scars that we have, because some of those scars, they bring us together. They bridge the gap. We understand those who have been marginalized, those who have been hurt, those who have been mistreated, taken advantage of, whatever word we want to call it, discriminated against. We have some commonalities. All of our people have went through some things, and we have to address what's common among us. We understand one another, and by that understanding, we can communicate better. So we have a bond. There are several times when you see African Americans, when they walk by each other, they may give themselves a nod. We have a bond. We know what we've been through. And when we come to our Jewish brothers and sisters, we know the Holocaust was real. It was real. Even some of the chronologically gifted or the older Jewish who have been in that struggle, they still have the marks. They still have the scars. They still have the numbers tattooed on them involuntarily. So we have to address our scars, because it helps us to better understand one another. This movie was very eye-opening, and everything that we have, I've seen, there are times when I wanted to cry, times when I got angry, times when I just sympathized with what was going on because it was real. So we have to address our scars. It's not saying your scar is bigger than mine. It's saying we've both been in the struggle together.
Yeah.
Rabbi Gendler, yes.
Could I add to that? Reverend Blue spoke very movingly, and I also was deeply moved by the depth of the filmmaker's probing and her portrayal of ways in which our communities, in their self-understanding, really do meet one another. At the same time, I want to be sure that this shared sense of difficulty, of coping with issues that challenge us, I want to be sure that this commonality extends beyond identified groups. For example, people talk about blue-collar dispossession or feelings of inferiority in the families of working class kids and so on. I know that the few students at Phillips Andover that we had who came from working class families had personal issues that strikingly resemble the issues that individual members of the Black or the Jewish community have. So I want us also to make sure that, along with appreciation of group feelings of dispossession or inferiority, we include other human beings not so easily identified with groups, because they also can identify with the struggle and contribute to it, and perhaps themselves enjoy some enhancement of self-feeling through that involvement.
Thank you.
Rabbi,
And
I was going to say, Rabbi,
please,
would you mind repeating that question for me again, just so I can hear the context
I'll
of it?
certainly be happy to. And I apologize. I should have asked you before. Would you prefer to be known? Should I call you Rene? Should I call you?
Please, absolutely.
Okay. Just want to make sure. Okay. So Rene, here the question once again is:
Thank you.
That the documentary makes a reference to the importance of Blacks and Jews not comparing scars. How do we avoid this in our current conversations?
Thank you. I appreciate that. And you know, the way I looked at it, when again, I'm echoing the sentiments that were shared here about the movie being very, very moving. And it had the historical references that we all need to remember and learn from, because as we've seen throughout time, history repeats itself. And how can we understand what may be coming ahead of us if we don't know what came before us? So really embracing and understanding all of the complexities and the nuances here really was important to me as I watched this film. And one of the things that I thought about is the differences between empathy and sympathy. And that's kind of the way I would answer that question. You know, empathy is very different than sympathy. I mean, sympathy, a lot of people go into it and say, oh, that's too bad, but, you know, at least you don't have, or at least this didn't happen. And those comparative things, that's not appropriate. You need to have that empathy to have that true understanding of our human nature and our human condition and our human collaboration in all of these efforts. So I would say that is the difference is, for me, is the difference between empathy and sympathy. And yes, we do have shared scars that we can empathize with one another. I don't feel sorry. I empathize. I understand. I hear. I'm listening. I want to learn more about those scars that hurt.
Well, I appreciate all of your feedback here. So the next thing I want to ask is about a recurring theme from this documentary, which was the need for one group seeking civil rights and equal rights to foster advocates from other groups. The idea that it couldn't be done alone. So what I'd like to know is, at least in our modern day, what additional groups should Blacks and Jews strive to include when creating a new, and I'm going to borrow a phrase from the movie, when creating a new coalition of conscience? So Rabbi Gendler, we'll start with you. Would you care to comment on that?
Yeah, I guess in some ways I had begun to address that already when I spoke of the need to include other groups who feel alienated. And I know that there is a great danger of excluding from consideration the so-called working class, the blue collar, the people who are less educated in the intellectual areas, however skilled they may be manually. And that this is a division and a dispossession that we need to keep in mind. I guess in terms of other groups to approach, it would depend on particular circumstances. During the recent upsurge of anti-Asian demonstrations and actual injuries, obviously this is a group to which outreach should be made. And so I would say we should be alert to the signs of others being attacked and invite them in, along with the many, many decent people who are themselves outraged by attacks made in their name and falsely ascribed to them.
Certainly. I absolutely. Rene, I'd like to give you the next shot.
Sure. I would say allyship is important here in building a coalition of like-minded people, no matter where they come from. There are many groups of people that can empathize and understand the struggle that is occurring. There are many oppressed groups that have experienced very similar issues throughout time. We look at our Indigenous people and our Indigenous partners. That is a group of people that have great understanding of what this type of oppression that we were describing and listening to in this film is all about. And again, making partners, having those people that have that shared vision and understanding and that shared past history of violence, of oppression, of those that want to take over an other or outside people. I think, there are many people, no matter where they come from, that would be part of that struggle and want to be part of the future.
Mhm.
Reverend Blue.
Let me just, my other panelists have nailed it. But let me add, one of the things that we have to look at is, or even just remember a phrase that was expressed throughout the movie a couple of times, and even Dr. Martin Luther King says, an injustice to one and an injustice to all. We all are feeling it. We all are feeling the pains and the woes in which we've had. America has not been kind to who we call quote unquote foreigners. We all are foreigners on American soil.
Mhm.
We all came from someplace else. And for them to have the mitigated gall to say that we don't belong here or we're second-class citizens is appalling and upsetting. With those who feel they have a right to dictate to those who have been, some of us have been, our people have been here before them. But when we look at the fact that we're all in this together, we don't have a right to criticize, to belittle, to be prejudiced against one another. We don't have that right. But all of us are feeling with the struggle. And what is done to one group, what good comes out of that affects everyone. And that's one of the things that we really have to focus in on. If I am middle class and I'm going to, if I'm middle class and I get a pay raise, it's affecting all of the middle class. It's not just affecting me. So one hurt that happens to one affects all of us. So we're all in this together.
By the way, could I add that
Please.
As we're talking, I'm aware of one particular challenge for Jews today in the United States. Yes, on the one hand, there are these resurgences of very ugly anti-Semitism. On the other hand, even though all of us bear internal scars from the Holocaust, we, the Jews in the United States, are also beneficiaries of extraordinary success. In some ways, if you look not for examples of scars, but examples of success, the American Jewish community and its transformation over the decades from the squalor of the urban slums of the Lower East Side to our current situation is astonishing. And it seems to me that at the same time that we retain our deep identification with the dispossessed and the challenged, we also have to find ways in which we celebrate what the United States has offered us and try to find ways in which what we have enjoyed will become the natural enjoyment of other currently dispossessed groups. And that's a bit of a balancing act. And let's hope we can manage.
No question. And to kind of lead us into the next question, if I could reflect for a moment on something that both Reverend Blue and Rabbi Gendler mentioned, the idea of being, one group being able to really help to raise up all others. When I was in rabbinical school in the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, I'm part of the conservative movement of Judaism. And when I entered, it had been 13 or 14 years since women had been allowed to become rabbis and cantors in the movement. At that time, though, in 1999, LGBTQ plus were not at that point allowed openly. We're not allowed to become rabbis and cantors. And I remember we heard that we had a guest speaker come in who was and still is an LGBTQ plus advocate within the Jewish community. And one of the things he reflected on was that it was only a matter of time, because this, this arc of progress would one day bring other people into the fold as well. So that anecdote, I was able to remember that as I listened to your words. But to lead into the next question, it's one thing to be able to engage people in other subsections, if you will, to believe in it, but it's another thing to motivate them to take some risks. Right? There were people taking big risks. We saw that throughout the documentary. And are today's social justice warriors, are they able and willing, to your way of thinking, or are they both able and willing to take those same kind of risks that were taken during the time frame in which the film reflects on? And if they're not necessarily able, what are some barriers that might keep them from risking a little bit more? So Rene, perhaps if we could start with you, and then Reverend Blue, and then Rabbi Gendler.
Sure. There are definitely plenty of risk takers, and they're putting themselves out there. And one of the phrases that really stuck with me that David Goodman mentioned in the film is that it took two white boys to get the attention of America because Black lives didn't matter. And when you think about how many people are using the term Black Lives Matter as a political ploy to divide us, as opposed to understanding where the issues are and what is driving this new movement and what is invigorating this younger generation to want to make this change. And this change is happening not only here locally, but it's a global change. There is a strategic movement that is happening and moving us and propelling us forward. And I just think that it's so important for us to understand that they do have value in what they're saying and how they are approaching what they're doing, and that we need to listen and learn and go along with this new movement so that we can be a part of that change. I know the way that things were again, you're looking back at history. There were large protests. There were people walking out in the streets, and we're seeing that again. And we're seeing that same type of energy to say, no more. We have to make system changes. And it's just amazing to me that the same things that we were fighting then are the same exact things that we're still fighting today. And how many times must we continue to repeat history before we can finally get it right? And I certainly hope that this movement will be that catalyst that will continue to propel us into the future.
There's a saying that those who forget their past are doomed to repeat it. And that's one of the things that's happening. I'm going to say this, as a African-American male, if I raise my voice in a discussion, people become afraid. Instead of getting to know me, they become afraid of me because of a lot of the phobias that have been perpetrated in the movies. They see African Americans as still being villains, not well educated. We're dealing with that. And even in the movie, there were a lot of individuals who were well thought out, and they were very eloquent. And that makes people afraid because of the fears and because of the portrayal that people have of one another. There are a lot of risk takers out there. We see the different movements, the Black Lives Matter movement, the NAACP, the National Federation of Just Communities, all of these movements, people are still using the same tactics. You cannot have a more effective tactic than the one that we've had and one that we've seen. We cannot change that tactic. When you change that tactic, you're trying to change the decorum and the methodology that's been behind it. One of the sayings that was in the movie, and that was said by Dr. Clarence Jones, we don't have to look for a new way of communicating. We just have to stick with the template that's been formed. We have to stick with the template. It's set right there. We have a lot of risk takers, men, women, in all the communities. And Rabbi Rosenbaum, you mentioned that as well. There's a shift of people coming out, expressing who they are. But we cannot mitigate those who have forged a way for us. We need to look at our past, our heroes, our sheroes of our past that have laid the foundation. The risk that they have taken, we shouldn't have to take as much of a risk because the foundation has already been laid. But what happens is people forget where they've come from. They forget the struggle. And we have to continue to remind people that you are here off of the backs and the sacrifices of those who came before you. There will never, it was even said, there'll never be another Martin Luther King. There would never be another Rabbi Herschel, but we can learn from them. We have to learn how to stand up and to speak up when any type of injustice comes before us. It doesn't matter who it is. I think wrong is wrong. Wrong can never be right. So when it comes down to the social justice warriors who have risked, they've risked it. We're doing the same thing. And I say this, if I'm pulled over, I'm still scared to get pulled over by police because I'm an African-American male. I'm one of the most feared after individuals in the land. And that won't change until people change.
Right.
So yes, there are risk takers out there. Yes, we're making the sacrifices. Each and every one of us have made sacrifices. It's not as pronounced as what others have done, but they were yet still sacrifices. So yes, they're taking risks. All of the movements, all of the killings that have happened to African-American community, to the Asian community, to the Jewish community, the bombings, yes, we're standing up taking risk. All of us in our own right are doing that. It's just not as pronounced or noteworthy as others, but everyone in their own right has been taking risks, and we will continue to until we reach a sense of calmness and goodness, which is going to take a lifetime.
Might I add to Reverend Blue's very moving remarks that in a way, we had it easier back in the 50s and 60s with King and Abernathy and Andy Young and C.T. Vivian and the Jim Lawson and the Venerables, John Lewis. There was visible and acute risk. Now there's an undertow of chronic risk. And when you, Reverend Blue, express this perpetual fear of being pulled over, driving while black, I mean, that this haunts you is so much more difficult to get at, defend against, and the threat is more diffuse and the risk also more diffuse, harder to pinpoint. All the more reason that we need to be vigilant, work together, always with that sense of striving for inclusiveness and for all of the immense relief that all of us felt at the end of the George Floyd trial and that conviction. I wish that a little more of King's healing, inclusive spirit were felt. We've all looked at this together. We have shared human horror at the travesty. And now let's, as we continue to pursue this, let's embrace one another in this broader commonality. Something of that inclusiveness is a risk that I'd like to hear articulated more, along with these our sense of the prevailing risks that you amplify so movingly.
That shared trauma that we are just talking about is incredibly powerful. And just imagine that this historical trauma that we've been describing has been passed down from generation to generation to generation, either through oral stories, oral histories, or experience. And we continue to, unfortunately, have to have that same type of trauma passed to the next generation. I too have to have that discussion with my adult children about being pulled over by police. They in turn will likely have those same discussions with their children about how to behave when pulled over by police. That kind of gut check when you are driving and you hear the sirens going on behind you, that fear is real. It's a physiological fear. It's a psychological fear. It's trauma. And when we were talking about the Chauvin case, obviously we shared that trauma. We all watched that trauma. And again, that's part of that oral history that we will be passing down to the next generation.
Yeah. Maybe this is a good time to add that in the same way that we pass down this shared sense of the lingering trauma, and in our case, despite the wonderful and deeply appreciated achievements. At the same time, what came through so powerfully in that film is a shared legacy, not of trauma, but of faith and affirmation. And I can't believe when Harry Belafonte and Danny Kaye were singing together, and when Belafonte was talking about the importance to him of some of those Hebrew lyrics, none of us who went down to take risks in Birmingham with the fire hose and so on, and in Selma on the bridge, none of us can forget how uplifting, encompassing, enfolding was the faith transmitted by the gospel hymns of those services. And along with passing on that legacy of trauma, I want to be sure that both of our communities and all of our communities transmit also that legacy of living faith. And I tell you, it sounds sort of old-fashioned, but to have an exchange of worship and in which the church and the synagogue both let it ring out in full voice, that also is very important in passing on a living legacy.
It's important. The faith is important.
Yes.
It helps us even when we're feeling down to have our faith guide us and give us direction. And it also relates back to when we talked about the Jews in Egypt, the biblical perspectives that have come from that. We've learned from those. Of those, and I perceive the Bible as true. So we learn from the history of the living Bible, of these things happening. And I would also say sometimes things have to happen to make us stronger.
Yeah.
We are a people who we need things to evolve. We need things that may hurt us to help us to come together. We don't come together as much as we should, but let some trauma happen. Let a travesty happen. We'll call everybody that we know, and even some people we didn't like, to come together to forge ahead for a common goal. We are people, we need a purpose to come together. It shouldn't take that. But because of the things that have happened, we've forged ourselves together. This COVID pandemic has brought us together. The things that have been going on in Black Lives Matter, the bombings of the different churches have brought us together. And notice it was the bombing of the churches. You can mess with me, don't mess with my church. When you start affecting people's faith, they will rear up. They will come back and come together for the commonality of they know what would help them in their troubles of life. The church is very important, and the church was the mechanism that brought a lot of people together.
That's right.
So I do want to note that if people do have questions, then you're welcome to send them in. But for the moment, I want to build a little bit off of what of these really excellent points here. And really the shifts may be talking about building relationships. For a little bit of context of something that I had a front row seat on, I've been in Buffalo for less than a year. Prior to that, I was in Charleston, South Carolina, and was a rabbi during the time of the horrific tragedy of the Mother Emanuel shooting in 2015. And one thing that I had a front row seat of seeing was in January of 2019, having the leadership from Mother Emanuel host one of the congregations in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and that they were working off each other and talking about what it means to deal with a congregational mass shooting. And company you never wish you'd be in a million years, but I got to see some of those relationships being built, and certainly my prayer is that that bond is going to help both of those congregations continue to heal. But on the note of relationships, we also noted in the documentary that the relationship frayed a little bit after the respective deaths of Dr. King and Rabbi Heschel. Who are some leaders that you think of in terms of potentially rebuilding some of those similar relationships? As you mentioned, Reverend Blue, the template is there. And part of that template, I would add, involves building those relationships. So who are some people that come to mind that hopefully can do some of that relationship building to take the next step? Reverend Blue, I guess if you're willing to answer first, and we'll go down the line.
Sure. Those who are on this panel right now are part of the fabric of the heroes that we need. We need both the young and the old, so we don't forget the blueprint. A lot of our church leaders and community leaders that we have now are there. I won't go and say political because they change so often, but our parents, our grandparents, we need to know the history of what happened. I remember my mom, she said when they used to go to church, they used to carry their shoes because the roads were dusty, and they washed their feet and then they put their shoes on and went inside to the church. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are some traditions that are good, that are wholesome, that we need to keep. And then there are some things that just don't make sense that we need to get rid of. But our community leaders, our youth, we have to train up our youth. They're the next generation. We shouldn't hold this to ourselves. We have to be on the educational mindset to teach them the way. And our youth also have to be willing to sit down and listen. Now, I'm not gonna, I've seen this, and it's troubling to me when people say, okay, you guys are old fashioned, we got this now. You need to understand that before there was pavement, there was a dusty road, and we traveled that road and we knew how to navigate, but we need to do this together. So we have many community activists that we need to join together. And as you've seen, there was a fraying away when the leadership of Dr. King, his assassination was a horrific blow. And then when Rabbi Heschel passed away. But one of the things that happened prior to them passing away, when they came together and they came into the synagogue, they were arm in arm. And I remember them vividly, they were singing, "We Shall Overcome" in the Hebrew language. Yes. That's common, that's what we need to know. We haven't overcome yet. We haven't arrived yet. So we need to continue to partner with one another, with our younger generation, with our older generation, and we need to continue to bridge those gaps. We are the catalyst to help get that done. Our organizations, and for that we represent, but mainly ourselves, pass it on to our children, and our children can pass it on, as Rene had mentioned, to their children. This is not something that's all going to be written in a book or a movie. The best way to do it is through passing it on through generation to generation. And let's not let the chain be broken.
It's one of those things where I felt, I'm glad you mentioned, Reverend Blue, about the we shall overcome in Hebrew. And that was one of those moments where I just was awestruck. And I can only imagine coming into a room where you're seeing 1,000 rabbis locked in arms, how they must have felt when they entered that space and heard in Hebrew, we shall overcome. Anyway, one of the things that I was thinking about, we had the real pleasure this past week of having a conversation with Lisa McNair, who is the sister of Denise McNair, one of the children that was killed in the bombing, in the church bombing. And to hear her talk to our youth, our younger generation, they were in awe, listening to the story of her story of hope. She didn't carry hate in her heart. She carried hope. She carried faith. She carried love. And I know that one of the students asked her, how can you be so upbeat when your family went through such a tragedy, when, your sister, who you never got a chance to really meet, was killed? How do you not hate the people that were involved? And she did talk about having an opportunity to meet some of the killers that they identified later on. And she said that she just doesn't have enough room in her heart for that she can't hate. She has to love. She has to face with love. And I think we felt that theme throughout the film, that's the best way we can overcome this divide is with love. Hate's not going to get us anywhere. And I just think that that's one of those things that continues to drive us as an organization, as people, as faith leaders, as community leaders. We have faith and we have love.
In some ways, we were blessed beyond imagining that all of this energy, all of this faith, all of this trust, this mutuality could be expressed in the form of two human beings, Martin Luther King Jr. and Abraham Joshua Heschel, both descendants of generations of clergy, people of faith in two ghettos, one Eastern Europe, one Atlanta, Georgia, that this could be incarnate, visible, palpable, was a great boost. It's important to remember some of us were jailed, for example, in Albany, Georgia, before there were any photographs of Martin Luther King Jr. and Abraham Joshua Heschel walking together. They received this spirit which was abroad in the land. They embodied it. And that principle of incarnation is very important. At this point, I don't see any successors at that level. But I do have to say that if I were a resident of the Buffalo area, I might get the sense that Mark Blue and Rene Petties might not be bad local stand-ins for me to link up with. And I think we could have some uplifting times of faith together. And I think Rabbi Rosenbaum has some temptations in his path and some invitations to affirmation that will move all of us. But we wait, and we know that deep stream of mutuality that both Heschel and King reach in the depth of their spiritual probing, that stream flows pure and powerfully and it awaits our local soundings, and it won't simply trickle up. It really will gush forth.
So I very much appreciate that, and Rabbi Gendler, I appreciate you giving a little bit of a nice nudge for us in Buffalo. It's certainly the best kind. We only have just about 4 or 5 minutes left, and we did get a question from one of our viewers. So I want to ask this real quick, and then anybody who'd like to chime in for a minute or two, feel free. The question is, how does the younger generation perceive the relationship between Blacks and Jews as it relates to the current social justice movement? Anyone's welcome to comment. We just only have a few minutes, I'm afraid.
The only thing I would say is that we just got to continue to teach our younger generation to not fall into the trap of the stereotypes. Set those aside. If you've got any preconceived notions, don't use that. Use the face-to-face it takes to get to know someone. Get to see me as my human self. Don't go with the stereotypes that come before me.
We also have to look at racism is learned behavior. What's learned can be unlearned. So we look at that. They're not born racist. They're not born with those phobias. They're taught them, and that we can unteach them by just allowing ourselves to communicate better. We need to learn how to communicate. And as Rene mentioned, come to me. If you have a problem or a question, come to me, talk to me. Don't be afraid to talk to one another.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I am, Rabbi Gendler, did you want to add something to that, or?
I wish I could. I am long so-called retired and spent the past 22 years involved very much with the Tibetan exile community in India. So I'm just beginning to reconnect with some of our young people. I'll be meeting with a group from Williams College next week. At this point, I have nothing to add, just a sense of hope for the potential of this continuing human contact among the three of you on this panel. And that gives me much hope and cheer.
So on behalf of everyone, I just want to say thank you, express my deep gratitude to all three of you for sharing your time, sharing of yourselves and your perspectives. The book of Joshua said, "Chazak ve'ematz," the wish that you be strong and take good courage. And all three of you have spent so much of your lives doing that already, and God willing, for many years to come in the future. And may you continue to be inspiration to everybody watching, and indeed to everyone who desires social change.
And thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much. I want to thank Rabbi Rosenbaum, our moderator. I want to thank the panelists, the JCC, Jewish Community Center Cultural Arts group, the Buffalo International Jewish Film Festival Committee, and the Jewish Community Relations Council as sponsors of the Talkback. Special thank you to Katie Zontek, JCC's Director of Cultural Arts, and of course, Mara Coven-Gelman for helping pull us together. Closing thought. We cannot rest upon the bravery and vision of the past generations, but to honor and learn from them, using them as models for today. And again, thank you all, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Yes. It was a privilege.
and an
Thank you.
honor. Thank you.